All right, so what we're going to do here is look at all the possible policy groups that are provided by Azure. And when I say policy groups, I mean the policies within those policy groups. So you get an idea of what kind of policies you can do to transform, manipulate, filter during transit of a request from a response through APIM. We're not going to look at all the code examples, but I'll pull out a couple per policy group here. We're starting with access restriction policies. So the first is check HTTP header, so enforce existence or value of HTTP header. Then we have limit call rate by subscription, so prevents API usage spikes by limiting call rate on a prescription basis. That's pretty cool. When you look at other providers like AWS, where they have API Gateway, there is like a fixed limit on there. I don't remember there being any kind of policy to do that, so I like how you have the flexibility there to choose. Hopefully it's on there by default in that base. I don't know. Limit call rate by key, so prevent API usage spikes by limiting call rate on per key basis. Restrict caller IP. So filter, so allow or deny calls from specific API addresses or add an address range. That could prove very useful. Set usage quota by subscription, so allows you to enforce a renewable or lifetime call volume and or bandwidth quota on a per subscription basis. Set usage quota by key, so allows you to enforce a renewable or lifetime call volume and or bandwidth quota on a per key basis. Validate JWT, so enforces existence and validity of a JWT JavaScript web token, extracted from either a specified HTTP header or a specified query parameter. JWT is very common for authentication of client-side applications. Validate client certificate, so enforces that a certificate presented by a client to an API management instance matches specified validation rules and claims. Let's take a look at that restricted caller IP. Very, very simple. We define IP filter, we have an action, the IP address that is allowed in this case, or a range. So that one is, again, very simple. These are not hard to figure out. We have validate JWT. So there is some stuff there, and it is what it is. Okay. So we'll go on to advanced policy. So here we have control flows. So conditionally applies policy statements based on the evaluation of Bool expressions. Forward request, so forwards the request to the backend service. Limit concurrency, so prevents enclosed policies from executing by more than the specified number of requests at a time. Log to event hub, so sends messages in the specified format to a message target defined by a logger entity. Emit metrics, so send custom metrics to application insights at execution. Mock response, so aborts pipeline execution and returns a mocked response directly to the caller. Retry, retries execution of the enclosed policy statements, and if and until the condition is met, execution will repeat at the specified time intervals and up to the specified retry count. Return response, so aborts pipeline execution and returns the specified response directly to the caller. Let's take a look at limit concurrency. That seems like a good one to have. So here we have an inbound, and then we define our backend. We set our limit concurrency. It's setting the forward request to a timeout of 120, so prevent enclosed policy from executing by more than the specified number of request time. We have mock response. That one would be very, very useful. Like you just want to, you don't want to have a real response. You just want to put whatever you want in there. So it gives it back a status 200 for application JSON. More advanced policies here. So send one-way request, send a request to a specified URL without waiting for a response. Send request, send a request to a specified URL. Send HTTP proxy, so allow you to route forward requests via HTTP proxy. Set variable, persist a value in a named context variable for later access. So here's an example of one where we're setting that variable. So we're saying, is it mobile? And we want to know, is it mobile? So the idea is it'll take that value from that agent, and then we'll have that variable available for us to determine, was the request mobile? We have wait, so wait for enclosed, send request, get value from cache or control policies to complete before proceeding. Set request method, allow you to change the HTTP method for a request. Set status code, change the HTTP status code to the specified value. Trace, adds custom traces into the API inspector output, application insight telemetries, and resource logs. looking at authentication policies, and I don't know why that's highlighting. Oh, I probably have a graphic above it. That's why. So we have authenticate with basic. So authenticate with basic service using basic authentication, very common for test environments. Authenticate with client certificate. So authenticate with a back-end service using client certificate. Authenticate with managed identity, very popular use case for Azure services. So authenticate with a backend service using managed identity. So there's an example, basic auth. That's a username, password. You've probably seen it if you've ever gone to a site where they just give you kind of like an alert. You have to enter those two in. And for this one, you can see that it's going to Vault for the managed identity. Caching policies. So get from cache. Perform cache lookup and return a valid cache response when available. Probably a very popular policy to be used. Store to cache. Cache response according to specified cache control configuration. Get value from cache. Retrieve a cache item by key. Store value in cache. Store an item in the cache by key. Remove value from cache. Remove an item in the cache by key. So here, the example is obviously very big for get from cache, but here it says vary by developer, cache key lookup. So I guess you're giving it these things. Now, sometimes they're not always very clear when you're reading them, but that's fine. For cache store value, so store value, you provided a key. There is the value. How the duration, I'm assuming, is how long it lives for, maybe the TTL. Cross-domain policies. So we allow cross-domain calls. This is something you probably really would want to enable, especially if you're building applications that are not on the same domain. So I could see people using this quite a bit. Makes the API accessible from Adobe Flash, Microsoft's Silverlight browser-based clients. Did not expect that as a description. Cores, I was thinking of cores, that's why. Add cross-origin resource sharing, support to an operation or API, allow cross-domain calls. I feel like this one's going to happen a lot. I didn't know Microsoft Silverlight still existed. If people don't know, Silverlight is a competitor to Adobe Flash output. I guess Adobe Flash probably does HTML5 now. I'm just thinking of old Flash players. JSON P adds JSON with padding, support to an operation for an API to allow cross-domain calls from JavaScript browser-based clients. So that is the cross-domain one, very simple. There's cores, and if you've ever seen cores, this looks the same. If you're on AWS, if you're ever anywhere else, it's the same XML. It looks the same. So it looks big, but it's not as scary, and you'll come across it quite often, especially with APIs. Transformation policies, convert JSON to XML, converts request and response bodies from JSON to XML, convert XML to JSON. You get it, find and replace a string in a body, mask URL in the content, set backend service, set body. These are very clear, set HTTP header, set query string parameter. If you want to read these, you can, but they're very straightforward. Rewrite URL, that's probably a very popular one, but maybe the example is too large, so I don't show it here. Transform XML and XSLT. Let's look at XML to JSON, because I thought that one was kind of interesting. So you say XML to JSON, and I guess it just turns it into JSON. HTTP header, something very common that you'll be doing. You can just set a header for whatever values you need to pass along. We have Dapr integration policies. So send request to a service, send message to pub sub topic, trigger output binding. There's an example of a trigger output binding. Validation policies, this is the last group. Validate content, validate parameters, validate headers, validate status code, validate GraphQL request. So we'll take a look at parameters. So here's an example where we have a parameter and it says prevent, detect, prevent, ignore. So I guess the idea is it's just saying, like, if those parameters are present, allow them. If not, ignore them. Validate status code. I figured this would be like a little bit more interesting, this one, but it's not. Status code, so prevent unspecified status code action. So do not allow it to have an unspecified code action. I didn't know that that's possible. I thought status codes are always returned, but I guess you learn something new every day. But those are all the policy groups, and hopefully you get an idea of policies you can apply, because that's the greatest power of APIM is those policies. Okay.